Hey hatchlings, brace yourself because today is my official beginner's guide for traditional Draconianism. And just a quick disclaimer here, this video is a safety guide that was specifically requested by the hatchlings within the Hatchling Clan Discord server. If you'd like to join us over there to discuss about the Draconian Reformation movement as well as learn about dragons, it'll be the first link down below for you. But we wanted to create this guide as the safety guide that I personally needed when I was a kid, navigating Draconianism and avoiding all of the cultural appropriation, harmful ideologies, and downright dangerous organizations, right? In terms of how people are predatory and how people take advantage of people within this community. And please do not send hate to anyone who is a member of any of the organizations that we discuss in today's video, as well as any individuals explicitly named in today's video. This video is not a critique of their personal character or businesses. This video is simply a critique on the community's culture, the ideologies, and the power structures, and where the information comes from, as well as how we determine the tradition itself. So with that being said, please again, do not send any hate to anybody. This is purely for analysis only, all right? And before we move on, this video in no way, shape, or form is a complete blanket statement for everybody who is not part of the Draconian Reformation movement. I have met many Draconians who are absolute wonderful human beings who follow traditional Draconian orders. So with that being said, we need to use our discernment here. There is a nuance when we discuss this, and we just need to keep that in mind moving forward. But I do have my notes. Today's a long one. We have 10 parts for today's video because it really is sincerely that problematic of an issue to cover for all of the safety when it comes to traditional Draconianism. But I digress. All of it will be free for you on Patreon, my website, Tumblr, Discord, all of my platforms over time will be compiled for free resources to further deep dive this topic if you would like some more material. And all of that will be linked down below for you as well. So let's just jump into part one. We have Traditional Draconianism Guide. So unlike other dragon paths, Traditional Draconianism are the collective Draconian traditions that were focused on appropriated elements like the clip-off, the Kabbalah, left-hand path dogma, Kundalini, Vedic astrology or Vedic practices, Shamanism, or reducing the vast array of dragon deities into one singularity. These are the secret orders, paths, kept behind paywalls, and only kept within occult books. So that is the general consensus for what traditional Draconianism actually is. And this is based on the etymology of the word traditional and Draconianism. So we are defining traditional Draconianism in the Draconian Reformation movement based off of what the words actually mean, not just something random. We're trying to really capture these words' meaning as authentically and as historically accurate as we can in today's episode. So this also includes traditional Draconians. Traditional Draconianisms are the various Draconian traditions that can be traced back to Aleister Crowley and Kenneth Grant as the occult origin, and some would say the Golden Dawn as well as a root of this type of ideology. So we have some organizations that would be considered Draconianism but are not limited to the Temple of the Ascending Flame, the Typhonian Current or Typhonian Order, and the Order of the Black Dragon. All right, and other smaller dragon orders that are secret behind paywalls or in books, and there are many of them, right? So you'll probably find them on Patreon or Discord, or they also have in-person meetings too, there's in-person locations as well. So it just really depends, right? And lastly, we have traditional Draconianism can also be referred to and derivative of the definition made by Draco from the Athenian lawmaker. He was just an oppressive lawmaker that basically said, if you stole bread, you get the death penalty, which is cruel and unusual punishment. All right, so next we have the beliefs. So traditional Draconians typically believe in dragons or becoming the dragon or becoming the living god, just generally speaking. And then the practice is typically performs high magic rituals with the dragons to invoke the dragon's soul or for spiritual evolution, self-deification, or transformation. And this can also be for like venerating like deities as well. And many traditional Draconians also work with infernals and demons and even angels rather than like dragons, if that makes sense. So next, the purpose. Typically, traditional Draconians aim to evolve thyself to become a living god or dragon, or like just general spiritual enlightenment and purification of the soul. And lastly, we have how to start. Within the various Draconian traditions, begin by studying them to see if any of them resonate with you, then initiate. And we will go over in part 3 what an initiation kind of looks like in a traditional Draconian order, but that is it for part 1 of this video. And it's just really a general kind of consensus for what traditional Draconians really are, what they believe in, etc. So moving forward, we have part 2, which is my traditional Draconianism notes. And unlike the other paths here in my dragon disciplines, I normally cover I normally cover just like different parts of the practice, right? But here in the notes, I will be covering the parts that repelled us in the Hatchling Clan, as well as in the Draconian Reformation movement from traditional Draconianism, and why it is problematic in the majority of instances. So these are just kind of some big things to watch out for, okay? So number 1, we have gatekeeping, okay? So often Draconian traditions are locked behind a paywall within secret initiations and orders. You cannot join without years of vetting, not inclusive or conducive to public understanding. There is a lot of ambiguity when it comes to traditional Draconian orders, and this can be extremely difficult for learning how to, or getting the information that you need to make informed consent decisions to initiate or to be a part of it, right? It's very convoluted in that way, which creates an air of mystery that can create a dangerous environment that lacks consent, okay? So next we have elitism, building on hierarchies and high ritual. And this is inaccessible to beginners or those outside of the occult networks. This also kind of breeds a sense of, if you're not in our innermost circle, then you are below us, which is where that like air of elitism comes from, right? So next we have male dominated. All traditional Draconian leadership historically came from male magicians with detestably few spaces for women's voices. And there are even Draconian traditions today that are run by women or have women figureheads, but again, they are heavily trained by men, they are vetted by men, overseen by men, and get their doctrines from male magicians, right? So this is something that for anybody who is woman, anybody who is like feminine presenting, anyone in the LGBTQ community who doesn't identify as male, as well as people of color, especially Black and Indigenous women, this type of structure with the male being male dominated is absolutely not inclusive for everybody. So then next we have trauma neglect. So focused on power and transformation, but rarely trauma informed or healing oriented, often creates spaces where ritual abuse is common. And this is something that again ties into that consent-based infrastructure, right? When we go into these types of orders, they need to have plans for how they handle emotional responses, how they handle, heightened senses, how they handle, potential mental fractures, because this is what happens within high magic, especially of a Draconian style. It is advanced witchcraft. It is advanced magic. It is advanced philosophy and ideologies that needs to be handled with care. And if these people are like, if you're not able to handle it, do you even think you're in the right spot? That is a red flag. People who are producing this type of content as an authoritative figure saying initiate into our order, especially if money's involved, they need to have a proper framework for handling people who are traumatized, for people who have a certain type of reaction, and they need to have a play-by-play for that they can provide for you if you ask them. And next we have dogma heavy, so emphasis on rigid, intimidating doctrine and obedience to order code, not personal exploration. And this isn't uncommon in a lot of orders. If you start questioning the leadership too much, like, wait, this doesn't make sense to me. Wait, why is this the way it is? Wait, I don't think this is safe. Wait, this doesn't make sense. Wait, I'm scared. Then they're going to most often, and in most cases, going to almost gaslight the practitioner out of their own intuitive experiences. This is not the case for all secret draconian orders. I am not speaking for all of them. I am saying this type of environment creates this type of scenario because of a lack of support and a lack of grounding in the actual doctrine itself. Because if you result to basically saying like, oh, like the love and light people like don't understand us, like if you result to like character assassination of the people who are questioning you rather than actually explaining your belief system, that doesn't mean you're an authority. It just means that your ideology doesn't hold up under examination, and that's problematic. So next we have detached from authenticity, lacked a space for messy, personal, inclusive dragon relationships, and also just relationships with deities in general, right? So this includes basically, like I was saying a little bit of the previous point, like if you don't experience these deities in the way that is in line with the order, oftentimes they will say that you're wrong, or they will kind of like be like, maybe you didn't experience it the way that you did, right? And again, I'm not speaking for every order and every single scenario. I'm just saying this is a common enough experience worth noting that I included it in today's video. So next we have associated with harshness. Typically, traditional draconianism is associated with strict, rigorous shaping of its personal reputation. This shapes its personal reputation as severe and uncompassionate. So all that means is, again, there's very much a lack of emotional intelligence oftentimes in these male-led spaces, and they have a lack of community care when it comes to emotional responses that are outside of the desired response they're looking for from their members, right? Which the response they're looking for from members is usually being like, oh, I'm all powerful. But this, again, I'm gonna keep saying it throughout the whole video, is not true for all traditional draconian orders, okay? But again, it is worth noting because it happens enough and commonly enough within these ideological structures, again, that it's worth mentioning for the safety of our community. And so these are large and part huge reasons why we founded the Draconian Reformation. Okay, so we're in part 3 now, and this is essentially, if you are looking for a traditional draconian order, this is kind of what it's going to look like if you want to get started in it, right? So it says how to get started on the path of traditional draconianism after this video is completed, if you desire to. So there's actually nothing wrong with investing your time and energy into initiating into traditional draconian orders. However, when you do so, this is kind of what is to be expected in a general sense of what that process of initiating into an order might look like, okay? So number 1, like all other dragon paths, it is critically recommended that you deep dive research on the countless dragon myths throughout history, as well as study the various draconian traditions to see which ones may resonate with you, as well as what they claim. Okay, because many of them will claim some very, very grandiose things, right? Like traditional draconianism being ancient. It's not, it's a new age practice, but it's based off of ancient like practices, ancient mythology, ancient communities, and etc., right? Iconography and stuff like that. All right, so next, number 2, step 2, is traditionally, once one chooses an order they wish to be a part of, they need to go through the Draconian Order's specific channels and vetting process before you are invited to the order, initiated into the order, excuse me, but kind of the same thing. So there is like usually a portal. The one that I'm mostly talking about in this particular case would be Temple of the Ascending Flame. They have an actual portal for you on their website to do this from, and they have again, list of like qualifications for you to like kind of go through, make sure that you resonate with, and then they have a framework for you to actually be like initiate into it and kind of get vetted and all of that. So it just kind of depends on who you go to, but just for like an example, we're using Temple of the Ascending Flame because it is the most popular and well-known version, right? So next we have part 3, assuming that you pass the order's vetting process. Then depending on the order, you will be initiated into the secret order, and this stage might cost money. So again, this is something that also a lot of, hatchlings, especially those who are disabled, especially those who struggle with neurodivergence and mental health and things like that, especially those who are struggling with trauma-based like disorders. This is not helpful to us, by the way. Most of us are very, very unable to even make money because of the disability that we are on. So when it comes to traditional draconian orders being like a buyer initiation type of thing or donation based, that's what they usually call it. So it's legally and like semantically not as you're paying us, right? It's essentially like tithings at church, okay? So like, but more explicit and like higher level, right? You have to essentially buy a seat at the table sometimes, which is not inclusive for all people. It just isn't, fundamentally. So number 4, at this point, this is like step 4. So at this point, depending on the order you initiate into, you will have to either earn your way through the ranks, but mostly it is a pay to play. And what I mean by this is the more ritual access you want, like the more actual doctrine that you want access to in these secret orders is usually behind a paywall, meaning that you have to buy access. So again, virtually a pay to play scenario, like, all of those free games that you download on your phone that nickel and dime you everywhere. Next we have step 5. Over time, you will hone your craft with them, and when deemed ready, it isn't uncommon to ritually graduate. So this is something that is what happened with me as well within my training at the Winnetka Tower with Renee Berg. There was like a ceremony. Well, it was just like a regular ritual, but I was helping them run the ritual, and that was like the graduation unofficially, because it was about making sure that I could run the sacred space, that I could be the leading figure, that I could, call upon the quarters, that I could, lead the people in the ritual. And that is the difference, right? So like some of these orders will have an actual formal ritual graduation, and some of them that are like local covens that may do it in their own way will have their own version of that. And it really just depends. And one way is not better than the other. It's just different and situational in most cases, right? So like for me, it was situational in the sense that like locally the coven that I had when I was younger operated that way, right? So next we have step 6. It is recommended to practice alone after to hone thy craft and to understand one's practice without a mentor. And this is like after you ritually graduate from these orders, before you do anything with that, it's important to take some time to yourself to really understand how you as a practitioner work in your draconian craft, right? How does your draconian magic work? Do you operate under these orders? Do you prefer their structure? Or do you feel like it's time to kind of innovate on that or polish your craft into something truly your own? So step number 7, and lastly, at this point, isn't uncommon to teach one's craft, which makes perfect sense, because after all of this investment that you're doing into learning these traditions, into leveling up through the orders, into ritually graduating, into refining your own draconian craft, into understanding what that looks like for you, it is just the natural progression to share that. So that is kind of the step-by-step basics for how to start practicing traditional draconianism after this video, if you're interested in learning more. But next we're gonna move on to part 4, which is normally I would include in my dragon disciplines how each discipline works with all faiths, like monotheism, polytheism, and atheism, etc. This video is a little bit different for this part of this, because instead of covering all of how it works with everybody, because traditional draconianism is not inclusive for all faiths, we're going to kind of cover each of the orders. So these are the 3 main orders of traditional draconianism, and it is not inclusive to all belief systems. The following are descriptions of the beliefs of the most popular traditional draconian orders, okay? So first we have the Typhonian order. So founded by Kenneth Grant, a student of Aleister Crowley, this was the birth of the modern day Draconian order of traditional Draconianism. As a direct continuation inspired by the Thelema, and a key focus on Typhon, the Greek adversary of Zeus, and a virtual non-existent focus on the womb or the divine feminine being central to the Draconian craft. And this is something that you'll see very common in all of these orders that I'm going to be speaking about. They will mostly glorify a masculine figure as premium and will use any sort of like feminine ideology or feminine deities, iconography, or even like labels like the womb, right? We'll use it in transition type of language, and not so much the core focus of the practice, which for those who are looking for a more feminine, inclusive type of craft within Draconianism, this is truly the main issue that we have, right? So next we have the Order of the Black Dragon. This is founded by Michael W. Ford. This Draconian order has a heavy focus on the darker elements, being a predominantly satanic order, also highly secretive, with little to no focus on the empowerment of women and the feminine form, and more than anything, just a community of edgelords. So here's why I say that, okay? Because when it comes to this, we are not saying that the order itself is like all of them are edgelords. This is not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is that when you engage with Draconianism through a satanic model, through a Luciferian model, likely what happens in that is there is a huge emphasis on who can be who can be cooler than the other person. Yes, this is a little biased. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I'm speaking from personal experience, being like on the receiving end of harassment from members of this place. And there's also been many hatchlings who've come forward to me having similar experiences. And that is stemming from this ideology, right? That they are like better than. And this is not a blanket statement again to this particular order. The reason why it's hard to talk about is because there's a lot of dark things that have happened with, members from this particular order. And unfortunately, we see without a healthy counterbalance for the ideologies that are taught within a satanic or Luciferian type of Draconian ideology, it oftentimes leads to members being not grounded in reality and trying to be cooler in the sense of who can be the most dark, the most chaotic. That's like the huge focus here. That is the word I was looking for. There is a huge emphasis on chaos without discipline in that study, right? It's often used as I'm just chaotic, almost as a way to avoid accountability sometimes. No, you don't understand, I'm just chaotic. That's not an excuse for you to drop Hitler jokes, respectfully. So this is kind of where we're coming from, right? It's really important to avoid desensitization of others when we engage with Draconianism through a satanic or Luciferian model, okay? This is the only reason why I'm just being a little bit intense on this part of the video, because it is so critically important for community safety. Otherwise, I wouldn't speak about it this way, because we are coming from a place of active trauma recovery from a lot of this. And it's just something that I want all of our community to just be aware of. I want to speak about it because I've seen firsthand and experienced firsthand the devastation from this. So lastly, we have the Temple of the the Temple of the Ascending Flame, which was founded by Asenath Mason. This secretive traditional Draconian order is notorious for its paywalls and Luciferian framework. Heavily influenced by the previous contributions of male occult figures, there is a heavy pitfall with cultural appropriation at the center of Asenath's official written works, which she has claimed the order is inclusive. It is still heavily influenced by the previous Draconian orders and ultimately Aleister Crowley and the Golden Dawn himself. And again, we in the Draconian Reformation movement absolutely have no tolerance for Aleister Crowley's colonization and just cultural appropriation of the majority of what he used to basically grab power and put himself and mythologize himself into what we know him as today, right? the most influential figure of the occult community, arguably in the 20th century, right? So this is why we need to, moving forward, especially within the Draconian Reformation movement, always critically think about where these ideologies stem from, where they come from, and why they are structured the way they are, because there is a history that is like a couple generations old that does like do its very own specific version of cultural appropriation. And while not all of the like doctrine of these organizations that I just mentioned, not all of the doctrine that they have is culturally appropriative, there's a lot of good stuff in there too. Like with anything, there's always some good bits of wisdom hidden in there, and I do encourage you to research them and read their books, right? Because all of these individuals, we have Kenneth Grant, we have Michael W. Ford, and we have Asenath Mason, have all written many books that you absolutely should read, but you should absolutely not take them for truth. And anything that you read in any book when it comes to this kind of thing, you should do your own research and do your own vetting of their claims, okay? And the best way that you can do that is using etymology when you research, which is essentially the science of how words are formed. And because of the study of how words are formed, there's a lot of tying into how languages evolve, the cultural influences. You're going to get a lot of really good key points of history through studying how the language itself is formed. So that is my master tip for today's video when it comes to studying. So next, moving into part 5, we are going to be covering traditional Draconianism red flags. And normally I offer my tips and tricks for how to begin practicing in my dragon disciplines for part 5. However, in my good conscience, I cannot recommend traditional Draconianism because of these dangers that I'm going to be listing now. So number 1, if any Draconian traditions claims its origins are ancient and older than modern day paganism, this is historically incorrect because the word Draconian didn't even exist until Draco, the Athenian lawmaker, making it impossible to be ancient. So it is a New Age religion that uses ancient myths to inform its practice and theology. It has not been around for 100,000 years before any other religion, so there is no archaeological evidence for that. And historians and archaeologists and anthropologists and linguistics and all of those guys are going to agree with me when I say this. Traditional Draconianism is a New Age practice. It just is. You're gonna have to accept that. You can be in denial about it, but when you look at the history of the words and the practices of what we're talking about in today's video, it is a New Age practice. And anyone who claims otherwise is a red flag. So, or they might just not know. So if they don't know, just politely inform them. So next we have any order that teaches about all the dragon gods or dragons throughout mythology, throughout history, being one face of many to a singular dragon deity is cultural appropriation. So one thing that we hear a lot is that all of the dragons we see in mythology is just one scale of the big black dragon. We have heard that way too many times, and it is incredibly insensitive to how all of these cultures independently created their own versions of dragon iconography or serpent iconography or reptilian iconography in any sort of sense. And this should be studied with the respect it deserves as its own unique, isolated culture, okay? We cannot be mixing them and saying they're the same unless there is literal, actual linguistic evidence, historical, archaeological evidence, cultural evidence of their derivative nature, right? It's really important that we don't just imply these things and put a blanket statement over it for sensationalism, okay? So next we have anyone who claims to be Draconian but then denies the Draconian paths are New Age paths, then that is often willful ignorance or deep denial. Again, it's really important that we just emphasize that, it is so critical to understand when we are talking about Draconianism from a historical standpoint. It is New Age. It just is, okay? So next we have, if anything an order is doing is derivative or even inspired by Aleister Crowley or his works or his predecessors or his influences, run far and fast away. And that is because it is heavily rooted in Western colonial occultism, okay? This is not authentic. This is not any sort of anything historical or indigenous or rooted in anything ancient. It is an invention of white people. And that is a hard pill to swallow, and I get that. But this is why we got to avoid things like the works of Aleister Crowley. And if it's incorporated, well, we gotta ask why. Why are we using this material? Where did this material come from? Do you know the history of this material? Why is it included, right? Etc. These are things that we need to critically assess when we are engaging with traditional Draconianism. And next, when there are a collective of ancient traditions like the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, ancient Tantra, Kundalini practices, Shamanism, it's been culturally appropriated because it is a Frankenstein practice when all of these are included in Draconianism, right? The Kundalini, not part of Draconianism. No, it's not. It is part of Hinduism. Leave it alone, okay? That is an ancient practice, not related to dragons in the sense that we practice it in modern times today, right? It's not a part of modern dragon magic. It is a part of an ancient tradition that is not connected. The only thing that connects it is the serpent or the dragon iconography. That is it. So next we have anyone who tries to trademark or copyright the term traditional Draconianism or any sort of like dragon path or religious path is sincerely not doing it right, okay? It's illegal to trademark paths, okay? Like as soon as you are on the public domain, right? As soon as you share your spiritual ideas or your religious ideas or any sort of belief system in a public sense, it 100% becomes public domain, at least legally speaking in the United States. And I am not a lawyer, but what I will tell you is that none of this will be held up in a court of law because of the First Amendment right, literally. Okay, so that means I could even take any word that I want. Let's use Cheeto. It's actually the name of a brand. And I make jokes about this all the time. I'm like, if you want to worship Cheetos, you are entitled to do that actually. Especially in America, you're entitled to do that because of your First Amendment right. So if you want to create a Cheeto religion, you are religiously allowed to do so. The difference is like material created, like a book, that's for an order, that can be trademarked and copywritten. A doctrine, like that is officially written for an order, that can be like copywritten. A name of an order, right? That can be copywritten, or trademarked, I should say, registered, right? But anything like the Draconic Path, Draconic Wicca, Dragon Alchemy, Draconianism, Traditional Draconianism, Dragon Fae, witchcraft, any of that, like it's a spiritual discipline or a mental discipline or a religious discipline, depending on who you ask. So these red flags are so all-encompassing. For the second half of today's episode, we are actually going to cover 5 major more red flags in deep depth because of how problematic it is. So the following 5 parts are going to be the 5 main issues that we see within traditional Draconianism, why they're problematic, why they are the main reasons why I founded the Draconian Reformation movement, and how to avoid them moving forward. So part 6, we have traditional Draconianism is not shamanism, okay? So traditional Draconianism is not a shamanistic path of the dragon. To claim it is will be textbook cultural appropriation of the Evenki people, indigenous to North Asian tribal practices. This is something that I cannot emphasize enough. Please stop using the word shaman. Shamanistic path of the dragon. Shaman, dragon shaman. No. This is cultural appropriation and it hurts indigenous communities. Western occultism is not shamanism. In history, the word shaman can be traced back to the Evenki, indigenous Tungunistic people of Siberia. It is a closed terminology only for their people and their craft indigenous to them. Their people have asked us as Westerners not to use these sacred terms, for when we do so, we are actively causing erasure to these indigenous people, which is not conducive to evolution on an objective standpoint. Traditional Draconianism and the ideology of Draconianism has always been mostly about evolution and reaching the highest potential and having the highest form of consciousness that you can to purify the soul from this world's programming, okay? It's about autonomy and being sovereign, all right? Oppressing other people is not how you get there. Being disrespectful and culturally appropriating other people's practices that are sacred to them is not how you get there. That is how you become a colonizer, okay? So indigenous erasure, right? So as Westerners with a platform of any form of influence, we must do the research on the etymology of the words we are using, or we become colonizers. Claiming that traditional draconianism is a shamanistic path of the dragon is deeply disrespectful to the ones the word came from. As draconians, it is our duty to protect and preserve the cultures we study independently of each other. I cannot emphasize that enough. There are dragons everywhere in history, and we study them all. And we become colonizers. We become culturally appropriative the second that we stop handling the different cultures, histories, and their dragons or serpents or reptilian iconography, mythology, deities, and belief systems as separate entities worthy and deserving of their own time, respect, and care in their study. That is where I'm going to leave that one. And lastly, for this part, we have traditional Draconianism is again New Age, okay? So by definition, traditional Draconianism was earliest documented in association to dragon/serpent occultism by Kenneth Grant and his publication of Outside the Circles of Time. This is the first time the Draconian Path lexicon was introduced outside of law context. So this is again a tradition that predominantly comes from authors, right, who created their own organizations and again their own orders, okay? This is why you will find the majority of this ideology in their books, right? That they used as kind of like, hey, if you're gonna follow this type of order, this is kind of like the instruction manual, right? This is where we get, you know, the Draconian Ritual book by Azura Mason. And Michael W. Ford has, again, like I think like almost 30 books that he's written. So these are absolutely texts I encourage everybody to read. Everybody to read, okay? But please do so with a critical eye and don't read it as absolute truth that you found the truth, okay? Like, no. Do your research, please. So it is again a New Age practice. It's not ancient, and please leave ancient practices like shamanism out of traditional draconianism, okay? So part 7, we have please avoid self-deification. And I'm just going to give a little disclaimer on this point too, because this is the biggest point of contention for why we called for the Draconian Reformation movement. And here we're going to break down why, how to avoid these pitfalls when practicing self-deification, and why it is a linguistic contradiction. So next we have the following part of self-deification is a concept and ideology that is in the majority of traditional draconian orders, okay? The following are the main reasons why I created this safety guide and also founded the Draconian Reformation. Again, this is the most controversial part of this practice. So self-deification, the term deity, quote, deity itself, is actively contradicting of self-worship. Let's break down why. When we look at the etymology, the self-deification is a linguistic contradiction. For the root word in Latin, quote, deificare or deificare, means, quote, to make someone into a god, unquote. Then this by definition cannot be done by the self, okay? That's why it is a linguistic contradiction. So this is probably the main reason why you're gonna wanna avoid self-deification. So superiority complex. You are welcome to worship yourself with your free will, okay? And I need you to know that if you're gonna do that, you need to have a grounded and healthy counterbalance that is rooting in your humanity and empathy, or you will develop the following issues. Beware those who do like worship themselves, self-deify, for at best, they begin to develop a God complex or a superiority complex. And at worst, they become racist, violent, and against those deemed below the draconian in their ideology. This is not always the case, okay? But I will say, if you are somebody who does self-deify, let me know in the comments, what is your counterbalance to keeping you grounded keeping you in touch with reality, and keeping your heart open to humanity, right? We need to really keep our humanity in this. Otherwise, we're actively dehumanizing ourselves, which is not the goal of self-deification in the first place. It should be, the point should be to be acting in a framework, right? From a space of God consciousness. What that means in this context, it means how can you think in a way that is, I am the operant power of my reality, in the sense of how can I take responsibility for everything? How could I be in control of my own life? How can I be autonomous? How can I be free? Freedom, right? Being free doesn't mean worshiping yourself by default, okay? This is something that is the nuanced part of this conversation, right? And self-deification, I've never seen it go well. This is why I heavily warn against it, and why I heavily caution against becoming the living God, because of these issues, right? So the way that it ends in the worst way when it comes to self-deification, we have to talk about this, guys. We just do, because it happens enough, and it happens most commonly online and in the online spaces, that we have to talk about this. Because even though everybody doesn't get to this extreme through self-deification, it happens enough and often enough that it warrants a conversation. So we need to talk about pure bloodlines, okay? So we see this in Draconians who practice self-worship without a healthy and grounded counterbalance. But self-worship is most commonly ending with a belief in one's blood being pure or chosen, right? For this ideology completely detaches the Draconian from the truth of their reality. We are humans, not gods. If you think you are a god, then control your temper when questioned about your beliefs, okay? If you're gonna claim yourself a living god, if you're gonna say you worship yourself, you need to be so grounded in people questioning that. Otherwise, you are exposing your own lack of discipline. Next, we have, if you think you are a god, then try stopping the sun from rising. Or how about you cancel gravity, right? Because one thing remains the same, no matter how you believe. Our blood is human, not divine. And to claim that our blood is divine above others is textbook racism, okay? I know that's hard to hear, but we just have to talk about this. And that is it for part 7. And again, please let us know. If you are somebody who worships yourself and you practice self-deification, please let us know in the comments below how you do so without getting, this kind of superiority complex, how you do it without othering others, how you do it without losing your empathy. We really need to know this, and we really need to have this conversation because people are not talking about that. So we would really, really, truly appreciate your input in the comments down below if this is a practice that you hold and you practice, okay? Because we need to have some first person discussion about this with people who do practice self-deification, and don't just resort to, oh, the love and light people don't understand us. No, that's immature. I need to know why your ideology is this way, how that works for you, what you do to stay safe and grounded, because that is how we create informed consent and practice. Because if there is no detailing of the terminology of how this works, how this practice works, how you stay safe and grounded, then it is inherently dangerous. Okay, it's just reality. All right, so moving on to part 8, right? Left-hand path and right-hand path ideologies are harmful, okay? And this is, again, going to cause a lot of people to probably get upset, but we really have to talk about this, okay, guys? So it says the left and right-hand path ideologies are remnants from modern Western occult invention. Left and right-hand path ideologies are rooted in colonialism, Orientalism, and cultural appropriation. And we need to just rip the band-aid off with us, okay? Because left-hand and right-hand path ideologies are not old or ancient concepts. They are new age, especially in the way that they are applied in today's modern age. So let's break down why it's problematic. So there is no historic precedent for left and right hand path ideologies, okay? So traditionally, it is not an authentic dichotomy found in most indigenous, ancestral, or non-Western types of practice, belief, or tradition, okay? This form of ideological categorization, i.e. left and right hand paths, is a framework created by Western esotericists who misunderstood, mistranslated, and oversimplified practices from cultures they exoticized. And all that means, white people saw people who were a different color doing something really hard that they were explaining, and they did their best to define that, and they absolutely failed, okay? That's what that means, okay? Which brings us to the crux of the issue with the left and right hand path ideology, right? So Orientalism, let's talk about it, right? So left hand path and right hand path came from racist translations from 19th century British colonial Westerners. They found the Sanskrit word Vamakara, or meaning left-handed practice, and Dakshinakara, meaning right-handed practice. All right, and these two practices are from Hinduism. They're rooted in Vedic tradition, okay? And when Western occultists found this, or Western colonizers, Western colonial people found these cultures and these like concepts and ideologies, this is how they were removed from their roots. And these are the roots that were removed that come from Hinduism, right? So the Vamakara and Dakshinakara, these are like practices that describe a ritual approach style. They're not morality based, right? So it's not about like, you know, are your morals there or not? It's about a style of practice, okay? So it was never about being like a good or evil, right? Like that has nothing to do with like Vedic tradition, okay? So they are both legitimate in Tantra. So that means you can approach Tantra from a left-handed practice or a right-handed practice, and they were complementary, not opposing. They were meant to be used in tandem with each other, right? And each practitioner will fall somewhere in that spectrum. And that is like what's the most important thing to remember here, is that has nothing to do with like, you know, this like binary, right? Or this like black and white thinking. So during the Victorian era, Western occultists projected their deeply Christian moral binaries onto these terms. And that is how we have the left hand and right hand path ideologies today, which is why it brings me into my concluding point. In the Draconian Reformation movement, we do not acknowledge anybody who uses the left hand and right hand path ideology or dichotomy as a categorization of practice through a moral lens. And the reason is because of why was this actually created? Why was the left hand path and right hand path actually created? I'm so glad you asked, because we need to talk about the faith police. Are you ready? So groups like the Theosophists, the Golden Dawn, Crowley himself, and left hand path practitioners used the left hand path and the right hand path ideologies to decide and claim who was divine or corrupted, to control what paths are valid or not, and who was divine or not. It was about power control. Who got to decide the narrative? Who had the authority to lead the discussion? It was about taking anything that didn't fit the white, light, bright, pure, and the dark, demonic, evil, bad dichotomy that we get from Christianity at this time, at this point in time, right? So this is why we reject in the Draconian Reformation movement any sort of left-hand path, right-hand path dichotomy. You can mix them. You can do whatever you want, actually. You were given free will, and some of the choices that you make with your free will can be really offensive and harmful, okay? Doesn't mean that you can't make that decision, right? I don't encourage you to make harmful decisions, but I'm saying that you could do it. like I said, you can worship yourself with your own free will, but I'm going to warn you why you shouldn't, right? So this is something that I think we really need to have a discussion on as a Western occult community. We need to talk about this because this is so heavily rooted in our ideologies as Westerners that it is almost foundational in the way that we operate. And it is so problematic and so harmful and so like exclusive of everybody that it becomes harmful in practice, okay? And I myself am currently on the receiving end of faith policing because of me choosing to operate outside of this binary, right? I get a lot of hate for that. I get a lot of very specific hate for that. And it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with people working with the frameworks that are in their mind that are actively colonizing their free will. Yeah, these types of ideology inhibit you from making free decisions. They inhibit your liberation because you are placing limitations on yourself. That is fundamentally what Draconianism is against, okay? It's fundamentally about removing those limitations and seeing what's possible, okay? And just because something's possible doesn't mean you should agree with it or go for it, okay? And that's something that I just really wanted to cover in, part 8 of this video because it is so aggressive. It is so harmful, especially to indigenous and ancient and marginalized groups, and it has to stop. So next we have part 9. We have no more draconian starseeds, okay? So the following covers why we reject any sort of starseed ideology tied to draconianism within the Draconian Reformation movement and why it is avoided. So what are starseeds, right? So originally the term starseed can be traced back to Ken Carey and his Starseed Transmissions from 1973 and published later within writing in 1982. Later, the ideology was absorbed into UFO cults, Pleiadian channeling, ascension and new earth movements, and contactee culture, i.e. alien contact and the culture around people who talk about that. Okay, so where am I? Lost my spot. Okay, none of these were indigenous, historical, or movements rooted within ancient cultures. These were entirely invented by white American spiritual counterculture creators during the 1970s through the 1990s. From the 90s to the 2000s, the term starseed was reinvented or reimagined and adopted through Dolores Cannon's New Earth Volunteers, the Pleiadian channeling boom, and early New Age internet forums and creators as well. So this is why starseeds are fundamentally an issue. There is nothing, it is almost like role play, actually. It's a great concept, but it absolutely has been mishandled and has gone in a very bad direction, and we're about to cover that. So they racialized alien races and caused cultural erasure, and this is fundamentally why we reject any sort of starseed anything in the Draconian Reformation movement. So we have, it was colonial spiritual superiority, right? So some humans are from pure higher star races and have divine blood, inherently racist, okay? So next we have racialized the alien races. Many scholars note that Pleiadian channeling replicates Aryan purity myth and practice. If you're unfamiliar with what that means, it just means that those who are blonde hair, blue-eyed, white-skinned are the highest form of aliens, or the highest form of like starseed contact, divine bloodline, which again reinforces racist ideologies, okay? So next we have spiritual bypassing and cultural erasure. Starseed teachings allow people, particularly white Westerners, to avoid any accountability by saying, oh, I'm a starseed, like all of this is below me, right? Like all of this like chatter is below me. Like I am like from this star system here for this mission, and I don't need to be concerned with the Earth souls here. So we're gonna cover what the Earth souls mean in a second. So next we have, it's culturally appropriated, obviously. So Starseed community steals from Mayan calendars, Egyptian cosmology, Islamic angelology, Hindu devas, and indigenous sky stories. So that We completely reject all that. And lastly, we have the hierarchy of souls, okay? So divided humanity into starseeds, which are basically the highest form of the soul. Then you have the regular humans, which are the middle. And then you have the earth souls, which is the lowest. And essentially all this is a spiritual caste system, which is, again, colonial in nature and inherently racist in practice. So that's why we vehemently reject Starseed ideology, and why in the Hatchling Clan, throughout the Hatchling Clan network, within the Draconian Reformation movement, and any sort of work that I do ever in my life, we are a no alien policy. Why? Because there's just too much to uncover. We are not historical professionals, and we are not going to be the ones making absolute claims about, oh, this alien this, or that alien influenced this, because at the end of the day, it actively takes the focus and attention away from indigenous communities who created wonders of the world and who created incredible technology that we don't know how to explain with our current forms and frameworks, as well as completely just erases lineages and the truth of these people, which is something that we are against in the Draconian Reformation movement. So lastly, and this is the most important part, we save the best for last. So let's leave Hinduism out of Draconianism, okay? Part 10, let's go. The following is a list of how Vedic practices and ideologies were appropriated by Western occultists into Draconianism as part to pass it off ancient, right? So the Kundalini rising serpent has been the cornerstone of Draconianism, essentially to argue that it's ancient, and we're going to break down why that's incredibly problematic, okay? So the Kundalini serpent, all right, so where are we? It says, raising of the serpent coiled at the base of the spine has nothing to do with Draconianism or the Draconian current. Anyone claiming the Kundalini has any place within modern dragon magic is either ill-informed, right? So you might just be ignorant, which is totally okay, now you know, or is actively culturally appropriating, right? So this is the issue when it becomes to, oh, we know this is wrong, but we're gonna do it anyway, right? So they're actively culturally appropriating it into Draconianism because the word Kundalini is rooted in the Sanskrit language from the Indian subcontinent. It is from Hind Tantra, Shaktiism, Hatha Yoga, and Kashmir. I think this is called Shivaism. Let me know if I pronounced that wrong in the comments. Kundalini describes it as a divine feminine energy coiled at the base of the spine, awakened through disciplined spiritual practice, and guided by a guru disciple lineage. This is incredibly critical to understand. If you're not being guided by a guru discipled lineage, you are not having anything to do with Kundalini, okay? It might be similar experiences, not Kundalini, okay? Not Kundalini serpent, not Kundalini awakening, not anything like that, okay? So it belongs to Indian religious, cultural, and philosophical systems, okay? Not within Western occultists or occultism. Kundalini is deeply tied to ethics, breathwork, devotion, cultural context, community, and a trained teacher. It has nothing to do with dragons, actually. Nothing to do with dragons, okay? This is why it's so heavily rooted in Draconianism today. So cultural appropriation of the Kundalini serpent. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Kundalini was stripped of its Hindu roots and called the quote-unquote serpent force by Theosophy. In the late 90s, its use was sexualized in the Western books, like describing it, right? Turning it into a generic serpent power. At the turn of the century, it was appropriated into Draconianism, which are not ancient, and blended multiple ideologies to form the doctrine. Kundalini rising is not a draconic awakening. And this is basically the probably most popular issue with traditional Draconianism is the Kundalini serpent and the Vedic practices and ideologies being adopted into the practice through a westernized view that has simply missed the mark on accuracy due to cultural loss in translation, right? So this is my complete beginner's guide for traditional Draconianism. Again, you can find all of the notes that I referenced here free for you on Patreon. It'll be linked down below for you if you want to read over it for yourself, take your own notes, and join the conversation. We would love to have you over there. And we post many free resources over there because it is, again, a community like hub for us to basically just go over everything that has to do with the Draconian Reformation movement. And anything tributed over on my Patreon goes directly back into the Hatchling Clan network to invest into artists that are hatchlings to fight the AI dragon slop, okay? So, and also goes back into maintaining the Draconian Reformation website, dragonmagic101.com, for free use for everybody. And it is an ongoing path that we are walking together, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join the movement with us and help us build an ethical, grounded, and inclusive practice of dragons for all, no matter who you are, where you come from, or where you've been. So thank you so much for tuning in to today's video. I know it was a long one, maybe the longest video I've ever made actually, and I wanted to just say thank you so much for tuning in. I have so much love for you guys, and I cannot wait to see you in the Hatchling Clan Discord server. Thank you, all of the hatchlings, for encouraging us to talk about this in an actual safety guide episode. If you want to be part of the conversation, don't forget to join us. It's the first link in the description below, I believe. And now, with that being said, all of this out of the way, if you are new here, assalamu alaikum, merry meet, and welcome back to your daily dose of DragonFaether. My name is Azura DragonFaether, the Draconic Priestess, and I've been working with dragons since the 90s, been practicing witchcraft for way too long, and somewhere along the way, Allah's bandwidth Allah found me, and now I'm Muslim. So if you want to learn about my story, about the magic of dragons, and about the miracles of God, then definitely hit that subscribe button, and we cannot wait to have you on our journey starting in 2026. But I'll see you very soon, my darlings, tomorrow, in fact, or in a few hours. But until next time, sticky, chicky, and freaky, little hatchlings. Okay, love you so much, my darlings. Allah Hafiz, blessed be, and Ameen. And please follow me because everybody's lost.
We'll see you back next time for your DDLDF, and like, comment, subscribe for your DDLDF. And if you didn't get enough, make sure to check down below to see what I'm up to and be in the know. So stay geeky and cheeky and freaky, little hatchlings.